Welcome to the Open to Hope Show. I'm your host, Dr. Gloria Horsley, with my daughter and co-host,
Dr. Heidi Horsley.
Well, Heidi, we've got a guest, I wouldn't say he's exactly a guest. We've had him on quite a bit, but he's a co-host with us today, right? A co-co?
I'm a
He
co-host
absolutely is.
guest.
He's a co-host guest, and many of you know him. He is Alan Pedersen, the Executive Director for the Compassionate Friends.
Thank you.
Hi, Alan.
Well, hi, and thank you for letting me be part of these very important shows and be the third wheel. I'll try to not get in the way today, but I know we're going to have a good show.
I know you're going to have a lot to contribute on the show, and you're going to sing for us.
I am going to sing.
Which is going to be a lot of fun at the end
I'll
of the
sing
show.
I Chase Butterflies today.
All right.
Oh, I like that song.
Fabulous.
Just feeling that one. So I'll do that at the end of the show.
Well, you know, as you all know, we are bereaved parents, if you've been watching the Open to Hope show. And we have a couple of people on the show today who've written books that are going to be really helpful to you if you've had a bereavement, if you're trying to get pregnant, if you had a pregnancy loss, all sorts of good stuff going on today. So, Heidi, why don't you introduce our guests?
I will, and I'll start off by saying I'm actually a bereaved sibling. So I am the voice out there for the siblings.
I'm sorry, I forgot.
That's okay. We're used to being forgotten. And that's why I'm here, so that I can be the voice out there for us. So I will bring in that piece too. And like my mom said, we're going to have a great show with some really good guests. We're going to talk today about defining moments and loss. And we have two guests on, Melanie Warner and Nancy Mae. Melanie is a journalist, and she is the author of Defining Moments, Coping with the Loss of a Child. And Nancy Mae is the author of The Energetic Fertility Method, Tools for a Healthy Conception and Beyond. And she is a life transition coach and an energy practitioner. And then, as you said, we're going to close with Alan singing about butterflies.
Awesome. Hey, thank you guys for being on the show today.
Yeah.
Hello,
Thank
welcome.
you. Thank you for having us. It's such an honor to be here.
It's great. I just love both of your books, and I think we ought to kind of separate. We'll start out with Melanie Warner talking a little bit about your book. Do you want to show it up there? The Defining Moments, Coping with the Loss of a Child.
Yes.
So, and I have a chapter in there, a
Yes, you
little
do.
piece, and you interviewed 50 people, right?
Right. We have about 50 different stories of parents who specifically went through the loss of a child. All different types of scenarios. Some parents actually lost more than one child. We even have a story of one woman that has lost 8 children.
Oh my gosh.
And has survived that. So there's a lot of resources and a lot of hope in every single story.
Awesome. Well, talk to us about your story, because you had a story of coming to this and why you wanted to produce this. You're a magazine publisher.
Yes.
Many
Yes.
magazines. You've
Yes.
been in the movies, all sorts of things that we've
Yeah.
talked about, but you had a loss, right?
I did. I lost my son Carson in 2005, and he was a baby. It was a series of many events at a hospital. There was medical error and a lot of negligence, and it was really difficult because I almost lost my life at the same time. And I'll tell you, nothing puts your life in perspective more than when you think you're going to lose it. So, and nothing in life really, when your child is sick, nothing else matters either. It doesn't matter what kind of car you drive or what kind of hair day you're having or any of that stuff. It just really takes this really quick, like, vacuum seal and puts your life in immediate perspective. And we had to make a decision after he passed away not to sue the hospital. We made a very distinct decision to forgive them because I did survive even if he didn't. And I really believe that that process of forgiveness and the energy from that decision led to my own healing and helping other parents get through that transition and ultimately writing this book.
Wow, you know, those are a lot of topics, Alan and Heidi, that I know we've connected with: forgiveness and lawsuits. I mean, we know people going through these lawsuits that can really...
Well, I think when people are fighting for justice, and people certainly have that right, but sometimes it's hard to grieve when you're doing that. The thing about your book, and speaking with you earlier, that I really like is you tell a lot of different grief stories of different types of loss, but you also offer resources with each story. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, and thank you for mentioning that, because that was one of the biggest healing moments for me as a parent, is talking with other parents. And when I could see that there was a parent, I mean, here I was literally one day out of, in my grief, in 1 week, in 1 month, and sometimes it was minute by minute, as you guys know too. And when I could see a parent who was 10 years out and see that they were breathing again and they were living again and they had joy in their lives without feeling guilty, I wanted to get to that stage, and they gave me hope. And even when the parents didn't feel like they were 100%, just what they had survived and just being able to share that story with someone else gave me hope. So we started sharing these stories on a local level in our magazines in Central California, and the impact that they had was pretty profound on other people just by sharing them. And at the end of each story, each parent was, we asked each parent to put their contact info. So we've had a lot of people who've read the book and reached out and spoken to those parents, and many people that gave Compassionate Friends as a great resource. If their son or daughter died of suicide, there were suicide resources. If there was an illness, if it was distracted driving, I mean, whatever the cause of death was, we have scenarios for each one and healing resources. So it's great. I mean, it's a dark thing to go through, as we all know, but it's like having somebody say, I've survived it, I'm going to take your hand, and I'm going to walk you through this journey, and it's the darkest point of your life.
So it sounds like Melanie helped you also.
Absolutely.
Because like you said, it made you realize that you're not the only one that's been through this.
Right.
And you held on to people that were further on in their journey as lifelines.
Absolutely.
So that you could say, hey, you know what, I'm not there yet, but I'm looking at this person further along, and they've had hope. So I know that eventually, someday, there is that idea that I'm going to have hope again.
Right, and because when it happens, if you go out and you start trying to research resources, you start seeing all the negative stuff. You start seeing how, people, there's divorce, or there's alcohol, or there's drugs, or suicide, or people contemplating suicide because they don't know how to handle their grief. And at that time, there didn't seem to be a lot of resources. And most people, when they're in pain, they don't naturally reach out to people. And I think that's the number one thing I realize, is that there comes a time where there's a choice, where you can either be bitter or you can be better.
Yeah, I think in a book like yours too, there are a lot of books out there where, I'm telling my story.
Right.
But what works for me might not work for Gloria. And by telling that, wide variety of stories and different types of losses, it shows, it allows people to grieve their own way and to show different styles. Because we grieve differently. No two of us grieve the same, even if we've had the same loss.
Even a husband and wife who had the same loss may grieve very differently. And I'm really pleased that we have several dads that also shared stories, and moms. So there's different perspectives of grief and what their example was. And I think there was a lot of healing moments for me in writing this book too.
Let's get to that in a minute, because I want to get to our second guest also. And I wanted to talk to you a little bit, Nancy Mae, about, we talked about different kinds of losses.
Right.
And you certainly talk about different kinds in your book. Do you want to hold your book up there?
Sure. Yeah, the Energetic Fertility Method, Tools for a Healthy Conception and Beyond. Definitely, the first big loss in my life was the loss of my mother when I was 10. And that definitely changed my life and my path. And so she's in the dedication of my book. I also talk about a miscarriage and a pregnancy termination that I decided to go through with as some of the losses, my personal losses, as well as the clients that I work with. Many of them go through miscarriage and pregnancy terminations as well. Yeah,
and those are
tough.
Terrific losses.
Yeah, oh my gosh. It was, for me, I remember someone mentioning to me, the miscarriage, I was devastated. I was so downtrodden, and it was so helpful when someone said to me, you know what, Nancy, it was like losing a spouse to you. And it was. I was so connected with this little being in me, and I had no idea that I was going to have such a strong reaction, and it was just, it was so nice for someone to validate that having that strong of a reaction was okay.
And it is validating, because I've had 2 miscarriages, and it is such a minimized loss.
Yeah.
And you know, we do bond, and like you said, for me and for a lot of people that I know that have had miscarriages, you don't only lose your pregnancy, but you lose the future you thought you were going to have. So, you know, you've lost
Absolutely.
all these things that you thought were going to happen down the road.
Absolutely. And I know for me with pregnancy, with the miscarriage, the estimated due date of this baby was the anniversary of my mom's death.
Oh, my gosh.
So
That
I
gives
didn't
me
think
chills.
anything would go wrong. I'm like, oh, this is
Right.
destiny. And
Yeah.
no, it was
Wow.
where I thought my heart was going to mend. It just tore it apart even more.
Wow.
And talk
Yeah.
about the decision to terminate a pregnancy. How did that happen? And that's got to be a huge loss that a lot of people will identify with this. And I think it's very courageous for you to talk about it, because
Yeah.
I think there are probably a lot of people watching this who haven't ever talked about that.
Yeah, it really, I mean, this was after a couple of years of unexplained secondary infertility. So I was so happy to be pregnant, and I went in for genetic testing, and yeah, I mean, the baby had Down syndrome, and it just, my partner and I decided before we had kids that if something like this happened, that just wasn't our path this lifetime. And so from that perspective, it was a little easier knowing what we were gonna, already had a plan of what was gonna happen, but it was absolutely devastating.
And was that before or after the miscarriage?
It was after the miscarriage.
It was after. And I'm wondering, I would assume that you got even less support than you did with the miscarriage.
I did, yeah, because it is, I mean, it is a choice.
Right.
It could have gone on, and it could have been, you know, chances are the baby would have, you know, gone through birth and survived. However, it was a lifestyle choice for us and our child. And to this day, I still feel like it was the absolute best decision for me and our family.
I think that's a good point where you say "for me,"
Yeah.
because it is not the best choice for everyone, and you know,
Exactly.
you'd really have to look at it on a case by case and what people.
The issue is, and you said it before, is that there is a lot of women out there that have had this situation and have terminated a pregnancy, and they basically grieve in silence.
Yep.
Because they can't tell anybody, because there's a lot of judgment out there also.
Yep. Yep.
So, like my mom said, it's pretty courageous that you would come forward and talk about it, because there's a lot of women out here that are going to listen to the show and go, okay, I'm not alone.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, even the clients that I work with, I think it's so important to be able to talk about it, to bring that out, because it's stored in us. And unless we get, when I talk about it in an energy fashion, but unless we get that energy moving, it's like this stagnant stuff that's in us. And it's so powerful to be able to tell our stories. And I always recommend to tell it with someone you feel really safe with. And someone who, at least to begin with, of course, and someone you feel like who's not going to make judgments towards your choices.
It's something, even for us as an organization, even within the loss of a child world that I work in every day, that our leaders, that we train them to make sure that we don't marginalize that loss, because, you know, grief is grief, and when you lose somebody you love, there's that grieving process. But there are the other layers that go with grief, and as you mentioned, Heidi, I had a lady who had a woman who had a miscarriage come up to me one time and say, "Let me tell you what it feels like having a miscarriage." She said, it's kind of like, you know, you have a day timer and you have all these appointments for the rest of your life planned out, and in an instant, it is just now empty. And so we work very hard. We're really trying to have a special closed Facebook pages for people who have experienced that loss, so that they can talk about grieving a future that they don't have, because that's very important. And it's sometimes painful. If you and I sat together, I got to see my daughter graduate high school and her first day of kindergarten, and you didn't get those things. So even though we might have had similar losses, it's great when we can pair up with people who really understand, you know, the uniqueness within the loss.
Heidi, it's great to have such a sensitive guy with us, isn't it?
It
I
is.
work with
wonderful.
a lot. I've had him slap me
Really?
around
How
a
many
few
guys?
times and say, I've had him I mean, I've met more people I had a lady at a truck stop one time. It really touched me. She asked me what I do. I was traveling, you know, playing music and speaking. She kept asking questions, and I said I'm in town. She thought I was at the bar playing music as a band. Finally, I told her I'm in the grief world, and what I did. And this woman, 55, 60 years old, tears starts coming down her face, and she said she had a baby born still, I don't know, many years ago, and she's just like, and they never even, no one ever let me grieve or talk about it. And I said, but you see, that grief is there, that love is still there, because that tear coming down your cheek, that is the tribute, that is the love. But I'm glad that as a society we are changing slowly, but there is a paradigm shift to recognize and validate that
I think
loss.
the internet helps with it. I mean, you know, being able to go on, find things, find information, find your books, you know, all that kind of thing, I think is pretty darn useful.
And we do include that in our book as well. We actually do include miscarriage. I had a miscarriage as well before my first child. So it is more common, and a lot of people give up. They're afraid to have a child again after that. They don't want to lose that hope. They have fear that it's going to happen again, so they don't even try.
Or people will often meet somebody who will lose a child that's older, and as they're grieving that, they'll look back and go, oh my gosh, I never grieved this other loss. A good dear friend of mine went back and actually had a funeral for the child that she had lost, put a headstone next to her son who had just died. She said, I didn't even validate that life myself, but now I know I need to. So.
But back then they couldn't. Both of my grandmothers had stillborn children, one on Christmas Day, and she didn't even get to hold them. They never even got to hold their children, and this was back in, I think, gosh, I want to say 30s or 40s, and back then they just didn't acknowledge it. It was as if they never existed, and they didn't get to have a funeral, they didn't get to even hold them, and they just disappeared. It was awful. I can't imagine.
Yeah,
I can't imagine.
That's tough.
So let's talk about some of the, I know you guys are both energetic people, I've talked to you before, and about raising your energy, and what kind of things do you do, and what kind of things did you do after the baby died, or after you had your miscarriage, or after you made that decision? Now, first of all, I want to guess that it wasn't like the first 6 months or the first week, or, you know, that you suddenly jumped up and said, oh, wow, you know, I got to get myself together. It takes a while, right?
Definitely. I mean, I can say for me, it was a choice. It was a very conscious choice. And there was a time where I really needed to grieve. But I found that the length of time that you grieve someone does not directly represent the depth of love that you feel for them. So there is no right or wrong for how long you grieve somebody. And everybody has a different process. But for me, it was a very conscious choice. In the hospital, I wrote an article 2 days later. I could barely sit up. But I needed people to know that I was okay, because I was a very public community leader in my community, and I had people watching me, and I felt like if I fell apart in front of everybody or in front of my other children, that it would give that signal to other people that that's how you handle it. So I did grieve very privately, but publicly I still had to try to keep it together, and that was hard at times. But I felt like if you, talking about energy, if you hold on to something, imagine you're walking into a store or your front door with a bag of groceries, and you're trying to hold on to this stuff while you're opening a door. If you don't let it go or put it down, you can't receive anything new. So if you're holding on to negative, bad energy or sad things or angry things, then I believe you can't be blessed with new things.
And Nancy, you got some ideas about, for people who've had pregnancy losses and that kind of thing, how to get your mind around the fact that you could have a successful pregnancy, right?
Absolutely. There's a lot of things that I talk about in my book about affirmations and positive thinking. I also talk about the fact that if you're still grieving, that's okay. That's great. You know, honor that, and you can have either like a celebration of that connection with that baby. I know I did that, and it was very powerful for me. Sometimes even writing a letter to that particular baby is really helpful. There's so many ways to shift that energy. As you were saying, if you're gonna either not talk about it, it just stays there. If you're not going to process it, it still stays there. There's a way to get the energy moving, and in order to bring something else into your life, you got to get that energy moving first.
Now, what about guys? Here's Alan, a sensitive guy, but what about the other guys? Do you feel that the guys in your world were as supportive as they could have been, and what suggestions do you have for guys? And maybe, Alan, you can chime in on this.
Well, for me personally, I was one of the statistics, and I was determined not to be, that led to divorce. And this was a big catalyst for our divorce because I almost died at the same time, and I had a very spiritual moment in the hospital where I had to face my own mortality, and my husband at the time did not have that experience. And there was a point where he literally said he almost felt jealous at a point because he didn't have that experience. So it was hard for him to process those feelings, and he didn't really know how to do that. And it ultimately, that was a catalyst for us as well.
And my situation was similar as well. My partner at the time, after the miscarriage, I remember walking out of the doctor's office. I was so distraught with tears running down my face, and I got in the car and I slammed my fists on the dashboard. He's like, "What's the big deal?" And it was just a different way of experiencing this. I mean, he did not have the baby growing in his body, and he, you know, just wasn't as adept at being comfortable with his emotions. And so, yes, it ended up spurring a divorce later on. But it was a great opportunity for me to learn about what I needed and what worked for me, and to learn about him and what he needed, and that it was totally different.
Well, my husband, we did not get divorced, and we're still together, but he also felt like he needed to take care of me. He felt like he needed to take care of me because he was given the message in society that it was my loss.
Right.
Nobody
Yes.
was going to him and saying, "Wow, we're sorry to hear about the fact that you had a miscarriage." It was, "Is Heidi okay?
Right.
Is she healthy? What is going on with her?" It's more of her loss.
That's a good point.
So he felt like he wasn't his loss to grieve.
Yeah, it's a great point.
And so I
Well,
did feel
we
not
fix-
as supported.
We try to fix things, you know, as men.
Exactly.
But once in a while we come upon something we cannot fix.
Yeah.
But that
Right.
doesn't mean we don't try and in our own way. But I do think a lot of men are marginalized in that fact too, and so they just revert to that role they know, which is to try to fix or.
Yeah, I always encourage a family to grieve together, or you know, do kind of a memory box or write a letter together. Yeah, because I think it's powerful to acknowledge that it is. I mean,
And it is
it's all of
interesting
us.
because with your baby, I mean, you carried it to full term. With our miscarriages, there is a bond there.
Absolutely.
And sometimes nobody even knows we're pregnant, but we do.
Right.
And so we're bonding
And you
already.
know that baby more than anybody
Yes.
else in the world.
So we have a longer relationship.
Right. And when
Than
you're
anybody
pregnant,
else.
you're already changing your lifestyle for that child.
Totally. Forget the Diet
The
Coke.
man, until that baby is born, the man does not have that experience with that child. He doesn't have any interaction at all. So it's like the baby doesn't exist until it's born.
Right.
And that's where I think there's a disconnect for a lot of men with miscarriage too, because like you said, they don't get that experience.
Well, I think there's, but I also think for men, in fairness too, that, you know, that future is there for them too, and they
Right.
see that future happening.
Right, and they mourn
Alan,
the loss
speaking
of
on
the teen.
that, the future, you're going to be singing for us in just a minute. And,
Yeah.
and we want to, Heidi and I want to thank you guys for being on the show. It's been great having you on, and I'm going to look forward to getting to know you both better and doing some things with you. And
Yes.
Yes,
you.
thank you so much. And I mean, energy blocks are key in all this. And so important. And I would recommend getting both of your books to anybody out there because they're fabulous books. So thank you for being on.
Thank
Yeah,
you
And
for
thank
having
you
me.
for
very
watching
much.
the show. And now we're going to have Alan Pedersen sing.
This road gets lonely since you've been gone. The only thing to console me is I'm sure our love lives on. It's deeper than flesh and bone. It's stronger than time. And it keeps you close to me. When I open up my mind, so I chase butterflies, I reach for falling stars, I look for any sign from where you are. I call your name out to the wind, so I can hear your voice again. Death can't keep us apart, 'cause I know you by heart. You're my heart. Well, people think I'm crazy, 'cause I talk to you this way. Oh, but you amaze me with the words I feel you say. You're the inspiration that keeps me strong. And I know you're just beyond my touch, but you are never really gone. So I chase butterflies, I reach for fallen stars, I look for any sign from where you are. I call your name out to the wind, so I can hear your voice again. Death can't keep us apart, 'cause I know you by heart. You're my heart. Yeah, I chase butterflies. Baby, you're my heart. I'm gonna keep on chasing butterflies.